The coaching vacancies across college football filling up in a hurry when we talk about USC, Virginia Tech, Miami, and the like. South Carolina is still trying to choose its guy. We bring in William Gunter from Fox Sports Radio there in Greenville in Columbia, South Carolina. Will, thanks so much for joining us. We can't talk about this mess without bringing you in here because there's a number of candidates that people are talking about. So let's dive into it in regards to who you're hearing and who you think is really seriously being considered at this point.
Yeah, and Mark, thanks for having me. I hope you're doing well. And it's fun times here, fun times in Columbia with an ever-evolving coaches list that is now 57 days old. Today, Tuesday. Today's Wednesday, actually. It shows we're exhausted down here. Wednesday, and as of today, the people that have been eliminated when Steve Spurrier first resigned or retired, however you want to phrase it, the initial names were Tom Herman and Kirby Smart, with Tom Herman being the top choice and Kirby Smart being a guy that a lot of people felt, hey, if the Herman thing doesn't work out, Kirby Smart's the fallback option. We knew Kirby Smart wanted to come to South Carolina, wanted the job. What we didn't know was how things would transpire at the University of Georgia. So it was a Tom Herman, Kirby Smart type deal. Obviously, Tom Herman is probably going to sign this extension with Houston and elect to wait out Charlie Strong in the Texas job, while Tom Herman has officially himself never removed his name from the job. All indications are now that he's out of the running and has made it known behind the scenes that he is not interested in being a candidate. We thought that the next easy move would be Kirby Smart, and that Kirby Smart would come in and bring a very qualified staff and be the recruiter that South Carolina was looking forward to getting. And lo and behold, Sunday afternoon, news broke of Georgia firing Mark Richt in an attempt to kind of counteract what they knew was going to happen, which was Kirby Smart taking the South Carolina job. Kirby Smart being a Georgia alumni, having played linebacker there, and all of a sudden, South Carolina is kind of back to square one, in essence, when that happened. And so that gets you through the first two candidates. What has transpired in the past 72 hours really is kind of a bunch of names. We can pretty much rule out Larry Fedora, who was a popular name initially at North Carolina. Today, he at least initiated contract extension talks with North Carolina. It looks like they'll move forward with that. So as of 9 o'clock tonight, what we appear to have is 3 to 4 main candidates, in my opinion, and I really think it comes down to 2. But the 4 candidates: Will Muschamp, Lincoln Riley. I think you still got to throw Sean Elliott in there, the interim head coach, although he would be 4. And then the 4th guy that I think is interesting, and as a dark horse, is Shane Beamer, obviously the son of Frank Beamer, and has never been a coordinator, but Shane was an assistant coach at South Carolina during the early part of Steve Spurrier's tenure, was instrumental in some of the recruiting success that the Gamecocks have had that brought in guys like Marcus Lattimore and Jadeveon Clowney. Actually, it was Shane Beamer was the recruiter of record for Alshon Jeffrey when he picked the Gamecocks over Tennessee. Mark, what we're looking at tonight right now, though, is 2 guys: Lincoln Riley, the 32-year-old offensive guru at Oklahoma, and Will Muschamp, the former coach of Florida and current defensive coordinator at Auburn. It is of my opinion that when an announcement is made, whether it's tomorrow or Friday or next week, it'll be one of those 2 guys.
And that brings up an interesting next question, because we're talking offense versus defense, and especially with Will Muschamp very much tied to defensive excellence in the SEC versus struggling on the offensive side of the football in his one head coaching stint at Florida. The fans want offense. The fans want exciting offense. But the football minds, the athletic administration, who do you think they're going to push for, an offensive-leaning guy or a defensive guy?
Well, again, going back to the initial guy, was Tom Herman, because he was offensive-minded. I can tell you through different sources that Ray Tanner did want an offensive-minded guy, but head coaching experience was also very important. Will Muschamp has head coaching experience. I think if you had 2 equal candidates, which I don't think we have here, that offense would win out, that they would go with the offensive-minded guy. But I think in this case, you're going to probably go with the more experienced candidate, the guy who's run a program here before, and that would be Will Muschamp. And I'll be honest, Mark, that is the best decision for South Carolina, because South Carolina at its core is a defensive football program that relies on the running game. They've been the best, and this goes back to the 80s when they had the fire ant defense. They've been at their best when they are a defensive first football program. There's a lot of defensive linemen, linebackers, defensive backs. There just seems to be more of those guys in the Carolinas. That's an easier position to recruit. And even Steve Spurrier kind of built his second name, his South Carolina name, on defense. I think personally South Carolina needs to go down the defensive route.
And Will, for all the issues that Will Muschamp had at Florida in winning games in the end, let's not forget a couple things. He had top 5 national defenses most of his years at Florida. Also, consider in 2012 that it's kind of forgotten how good that football team was. Aside from being a turnover fest against Georgia, they would have played in the SEC championship game. They probably played the toughest schedule in the country. They went 11-1. And also that, again, a lot of coaches, they learn from that first CEO job. So if you're a head coach in the SEC, it's like being a CEO, and you maybe have to have that one run through to understand what you did wrong and the mistakes you made, and have that second go around to get it right. So maybe it's a time of redemption for Will Muschamp in being a head coach for a second time around.
You know, and I've tried to explain that to a lot of people. When you look at what Will Muschamp did overall, certainly there's questions, there's issues. The main one being quarterback recruiting, how that was handled during his time at Florida. Although you can basically Will Greer, who was having a very good 2015 season before the issues he encountered, was a Will Muschamp recruit. And then the offensive coordinator situation, starting with Charlie Weiss and going to Brent Peace, the former Boise State offensive coordinator, and then obviously Kurt Roper coming from Duke at the very end and spending one season there. But the injuries that Will Muschamp sustained, 29 injuries in that 29 injuries to starters, 29 obviously can only have 22 starters, but throughout the season, 29 players who started a game, then missed a full game with an injury. It was ridiculous that year. 2014, obviously his final year there, they only played 11 games. Idaho was rained out, and then they had a fluke loss to South Carolina. Things could have been entirely different. I'm with you. I am a believer that Will Muschamp has a chip on his shoulder, and I think for South Carolina, who's had Lou Holtz and Steve Spurrier for the last 17 seasons, you finally get a coach who's running from his past, not living on his past. You don't have a guy saying, well, I did this at Notre Dame, I did this at Florida. You got a guy going, hey, forget that Florida thing I did. Let me make my name here. Let me prove to you guys that I can be a successful coach. And Mark, South Carolina is the kind of program that needs a coach with a chip on its shoulder right now. Kirby Smart going to Georgia. Dabo Swinney's got a monster going up at Clemson. South Carolina needs a guy with a bit of a chip on his shoulder coming in here who has coaching experience, who has SEC experience, but can come in and is fighting the underdog role, because that's South Carolina at its core. That's the program, the underdog program, that, again, defense and running game, not attractive, not stylish on television. And I think Will Muschamp fits that to a T.
Yeah, and that's a great angle, Will. I appreciate that. Also, throw this one at you, that since Urban Meyer left Florida and Georgia and South Carolina owned that division for 4 or 5 years, it's interesting to me that Georgia loses its coach or lets Mark Richt go, and South Carolina is looking for a coach the same off season. And now you go forward, and for the next head coach of each university, Kirby Smart at Georgia, we'll see who it's going to be in Columbia. They're forever going to be tied together in regards to, okay, who takes off and who is able to lead the program back to contention in the SEC Eastern Division.
Yeah, you know what? Certainly, I can see that. I think, though, after the things that took place today with Mark Richt in Georgia, with Mark Richt in Miami, Kirby Smart, they're not going to look at South Carolina. The fact that Mark Richt got right back involved in coaching and winning an average of 9 games, winning 78% of your games, everything he did, Kirby Smart's going to have to live up to Mark Richt, who's not going to the television studio. If Mark Richt goes down and starts winning at Miami, and Kirby Smart comes out of the box, and let's be honest, the bar is so high for Kirby Smart in year one. If you don't win the SEC East, you failed. If Mark Richt goes down and wins instantly at Miami, that's who he's compared to South Carolina's a rebuilding job right now. If they can get to 7 wins next year, regardless of the head coach, it'll be a success. If they can get to 8, there are some deficiencies. So while I understand what you're saying, and yes, it is, there will be some comparisons, obviously. For Kirby Smart, he's in a much bigger situation there because they're going to look down there to Miami now. And the first time Kirby Smart loses a game that he shouldn't, and Mark Richt pulls off an upset, and I think we both know Mark Richt's one of the best coaches in the country, and that's going to happen. They're going to go, I can't believe we fired that guy to bring in an unproven head coach. I'll be honest, I was stunned with the decision to let Mark Richt go. Given his resume, given his things, certainly could have changes been made to that staff. Yes, it's not a good staff, and offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer was probably a poor hire there. But Kirby Smart enters that thing not competing against whoever South Carolina hires in the Gamecocks. He's going to be competing against the entire East, but also against whatever it is Mark Richt's doing in Miami, which puts him in an awful position.
So you've been pretty clear here. You are in the Mark Richt camp that Georgia is out of its mind in letting him go.
I don't understand how you do anything like that. I mean, the ladder only goes so high, and to get into that rarefied air, I get it. And I'm one of the people who says that Georgia conceivably is one of the, if not the most underachieving program in the last 30 years because no national championships, not even playing for a national championship. You look around the SEC and what Auburn's done, playing in 2 championship games and winning one, LSU, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee's even won one back in the 90s. I mean, look, I get it, Georgia, but you only can go so high. I mean, the bar is set now. Kirby Smart, you inherit a great recruiting class. You inherit a great team. Next year, you don't win double-digit games. You don't win the East. You failed. You failed right off the bat. And how long is your tenure if you go 3 years and Jim McElwain looks like he's starting to get things going at Florida? Butch Jones is recruiting out of his mind at Tennessee. These programs are getting better. And if you're Georgia and you don't win an SEC East in the next 3 years, you fire him, right? Because that's the precedent you just set last Saturday. It's win the SEC championship or fired.
In addition to his wins and losses track record, I'm going to make 1 point for Richt and 1 against him. The 1 point I'll make in addition to what he accomplished on the field is that the guy is a solid guy. You don't need to worry about bringing him into your football program and guys running amok. You're always going to have some issues. You got 20-year-olds, 18-year-olds running around, 105 of them. You're always going to have some minor issues, but he has always run a clean program. He's a man of integrity, man of character. He's a family guy. He's a solid guy. He's a great guy. Nothing but great things to say about Mark Richt. On the other hand, the recruiting base is there. It's surrounding Atlanta. I saw a study a couple months ago that Atlanta and the metro area produces more high-caliber FBS players and NFL players than any metro area in the country. So it's loaded with talent. So we're going to see if these top 5 and top 10 classes are the doing of Mark Richt more or the University of Georgia. We'll see with the new coach coming in there. So my one knock against Mark Richt is he won the 8 or 9 games he was supposed to win, and then every year there were 2 or 3 games where the other team lined up and they were just as talented, and he usually lost those games. And I really can't think of one game that a Mark Richt team jumped up and pulled off a major upset where he did an outstanding coaching job in any particular game to pull off a major upset.
I agree with you on the recruit. I think you and I could lead the Georgia program and pull in a top 5 class because of, like you said, the talent is in the state of Georgia. Now, the last 2 years ago, Todd Gurley goes down, and Nick Chubb obviously stepped up and was a very good player. And this year, Nick Chubb goes down, and so forth and so on. He's had some injuries there. There have been, I will say this for Georgia and agree completely, there's been mind-boggling losses for the Bulldogs. I saw one last year at Williams-Brice Stadium when an undermanned South Carolina team somehow beat them 38-35. I also witnessed that Florida game last year where Florida threw 6 passes and ran for 418 yards, and somehow, some way, Georgia fell on their face in that game. So I understand that it'll be interesting to see Mark Richt. And again, that goes back as you watch everything transpire here in the Southeastern Conference. I mean, especially in the Eastern Division where you lost Steve Spurrier, you lose Mark Richt, and you lose Gary Pinkel. And that's 3 really good coaches. That's 3 really high-quality individuals The SEC East is going to be different, and it sets up perfectly as Jim McElwain transitions in, as Butch Jones appears to be getting that program up and running. The SEC East is wide open all of a sudden, and that's why I say, to go back to your initial point, the Kirby Smart comparisons to South Carolina, he doesn't have to worry about that. I think he's competing against a lot of other factors, and man, the bar is set so high for him instantaneously out of the gate, having to win, and that makes it so tough.
And the coach can only control so much. So unfortunately, as we've seen in the SEC this season, if Hunter Henry doesn't throw the ball back over his head on a 4th and 25, Alabama's not in the SEC championship game. And for Mark Richt 3 years ago, if the clock doesn't tick off or the pass receiver doesn't down the football at the 4-yard line, he's got another couple plays to get a shot at the national championship game, a game that they would have been a decided favorite in against Notre Dame. And maybe the entire track record from a perception standpoint of the typical fan is completely reversed on Mark Richt.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. And it's just funny. You watch the way college football is now starting to play out. LSU is a perfect example. I mean, on Saturday night, we think Les Miles is done. And to me, what was more amazing about LSU and Les Miles on Saturday night is if you watch that game, they went 19-7. That was the example of why LSU wanted to fire him. It was ugly. The offense was discombobulated. It was not a good game. And, all of a sudden in the third quarter, it's like, oh, well, you know what, we're going to keep him because the media is making us look like awful people for firing Les Miles. College football is the big time, especially in the South now, where money is pouring in left and right. I just watched them put up a beautiful new indoor facility here in Columbia. I see what they're building at other places. The stakes to win and be successful are growing each and every year. You see the casualty now in Mark Richt. Les Miles survived it. Can he survive it another season? I mean, that SEC West is so tough. I will say, I think whoever gets the South Carolina job gets a reprieve on that, because I've said it several times, as South Carolina is still a growing program, you come into that job, the expectation over a 5-year period is going to be, hey, let's win 8 games. Let's beat Clemson 3 times and win the SEC East once. You do that, they're going to name something after you, a street, a building, a bunch of babies. I mean, there's going to be a lot of things named after you. So South Carolina's on a different plane from those teams right now. And I'll say this, going back to Will Muschamp, who again is my personal favorite at this point in time, that expectation is entirely different than the expectation he faced at Florida. And I think that's a better fit for him as well.
Okay, William Gunter from Fox Sports Radio there in Columbia and Greenville, South Carolina, breaking down the head coaching vacancy for the South Carolina Gamecocks. William, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, man, always love it. And we got basketball season. I know you're a basketball guy, too, so I've been watching the Big Ten ACC Challenge. And football, Christmas is right around the corner. So bowl season, I don't know if you're a bowl guy like I am. We can't have enough. Just toss teams out there and throw Christmas parties. So anytime, always enjoy it.
Good stuff.